The original Spider-Man trilogy concluded roughly 20 years ago, and this trilogy has certainly left its mark on pop culture. Sam Raimi's 3 films starring Tobey Maguire are some of the most influential comic book movies ever made. With the 9th live-action Spider-Man movie just around the corner, I wanted to take a look back at the trilogy that started it all. How well have these 3 films aged? How much have they impacted the comic book genre? And most importantly, how good are these films? When looking at a trilogy of films that began almost 25 years ago, it's important to take into account what went into these films being made. So let's travel back in time to the 90s and take a look at the production of Spider-Man. Spider-Man has always been one of the most popular comic book characters, created by Stan Lee and making his first appearance all the way back in 1962. However, the earliest attempts at making a live-action Spider-Man movie were all the way back in the 80s. After the success of 1978's Superman, there was interest in developing another superhero movie to rival it. However, after the release of Superman 3 in 1983, which was a critical and commercial failure, comic book movies became harder to sell to studios. So the Spider-Man project was put on hold. Eventually, the Cannon Group acquired the rights to Spider-Man in 1985 for just $225,000, and they began development on a Spider-Man movie. Leslie Stevens was brought on to write the screenplay, and Joseph Zito was brought on to direct the film. Allegedly, there was interest in casting Tom Cruise to play Peter Parker. However, after the commercial and critical bombs of Superman 4 and Masters of the Universe, both releasing in 1987 and both made by the Cannon Group, the Spider-Man movie was yet again put on hold. In the 1990s, there was another attempt by James Cameron, of all people, to direct a Spider-Man movie. Cameron even revealed that he considered Leonardo DiCaprio for the role of Peter Parker. However, after the disaster that was Batman and Robin, the movie yet again was put on hold. The 80s and 90s, while having a few successful comic book movies like Batman, weren't ready to try out Spider-Man. However, in 1998, after the release of Blade and with X-Men under production, another attempt on Spider-Man was made. Marvel sold the rights to Sony for $7 million, and a screenplay was issued based on some of the ideas made by James Cameron. Michael Bay, Tim Burton, Chris Columbus, Roland Emmerich, David Fincher, Ang Lee, and even M. Night Shyamalan were all considered for the director's chair. Fincher was offered the job, but he ended up turning it down. Chris Columbus was also offered the job, but turned it down to direct Harry Potter instead. Eventually, Sam Raimi was hired to direct, with production beginning in January of 2001. Tobey Maguire was actually Sam Raimi's first choice for the role of Peter Parker after he saw him in The Cider House Rules. The studio didn't love the idea, but were won over after his audition. Rounding out the cast was Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, James Franco as Harry Osborn, and Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson. Funny enough, Stan Lee himself was interested in playing J. Jonah Jameson, but the role went to J.K. Simmons, who has since been praised for one of the best comic book castings in history. Principal photography began in January of 2001 and concluded in June of 2001. One of the most notable behind-the-scenes lore of this movie was how the 9/11 terrorist attacks impacted the production of the film. There were posters featuring the Twin Towers, as well as a teaser trailer which featured the Twin Towers. Both ended up being removed and replaced. The Twin Towers actually made it into 2 shots of the final movie. Roughly a year later, on May 3rd, 2002, Spider-Man was released in theaters. Now, before I dive deep into the story and how it's all constructed, which is usually the bread and butter of my videos, I want to spend some time talking about the life this movie has. I typically cringe when people say that modern movies don't have any character or style to them, because I feel like a lot of movies still do. I would say the newest Superman movie is a great example of a movie that does have character and life to it. What I will say though is that I can't recall a series of movies that have as much life and as much character as the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. These movies exude creativity around every corner. Just from the way these movies are filmed, to the little transitions between scenes, to the music, to the montage sequences, this movie has things that I almost rarely see in blockbuster movies these days. Most fans talk about the swinging scenes and how shit like that is lacking these days. I totally agree. They give these movies so much energy, it's hard to explain. I really do feel like this style takes these movies to the next level. These movies aren't meant to be the most serious movies in the world. They're campy, and sometimes you have to suspend your disbelief in order to make things work for yourself. But these movies really go out of their way to make sure you buy into that campiness. The sequence of Peter sketching out his suit for the first time is one of my favorite examples of this. When was the last time a comic book movie was filmed with this much creativity? It just doesn't happen anymore. These parts of this movie and the entire trilogy I love so much. Now, another criminally underrated aspect of these movies is what it does with its setting. New York is a character in these movies. One thing that really caught my eye is just how much time is spent on the streets of New York and how these scenes were likely filmed on the streets of New York. They're often establishing shots, but they do so much to give this movie life. Even Peter and MJ's neighborhood. This is clearly a real place where real people live. I couldn't tell you what the house of any of the other Spider-Men look like, but I can with this Spider-Man. The first Avengers movie mostly takes place in New York, but it never feels as close to being New York as these movies do. Everything feels like a set there, while these Spider-Man movies feel like New York. Also, even the interiors of these movies really stand out. I love the contrast of how welcoming and warm the Parker house is compared to the coldness of the Osborn mansion. Again, it's all about giving life to these movies. I don't know if it's simply because these movies are older or because Sam Raimi made that extra effort. Either way, New York really stands out. Now, if I had to be critical of some elements of this movie, yeah, not all of it has aged the best. Some of the CGI is a little bit dated, and some of the campiness just isn't for me. Like the skeleton bomb during the parade is comical to me. Also, a lot of the dialogue isn't the best, most specifically from Harry, but I can look past a lot of these flaws because overall this first movie is excellent. Now, what makes it truly excellent is the story, so let's dive deep into that. This first movie really feels like it's divided into two halves. The first half of the movie is pretty much solely character development for our main character, most notably Peter. The second half, starting with the parade, is when Spider-Man and Green Goblin begin to clash and the main plot kicks in. Now, one thing this movie deserves a lot of credit for is how excellently designed it is. Yes, this is not the most serious movie in the world, and yes, it's not the most complex movie in the world, but that doesn't mean the movie isn't brilliant. That doesn't mean the screenplay doesn't perfectly fit this story. Its simplicity is not a weakness, it's a strength. Spider-Man is so much about Peter Parker and his struggles, and a good Spider-Man movie really needs to focus on that. The first half of this movie has close to no plot. Only scenes with Norman really progress the plot. I'm fine with that because the writer spends so much time developing Peter and his journey. By the time Peter gets bit, like 10 minutes into the movie, we already know so much about him. This is an origin story after all, so yeah, it should focus more so on character than plot. These movies are Peter Parker films, they're not Spider-Man films. So what is Peter's arc in this movie really about? I would argue it's a movie about discovering identity. After the opening credits, something I find to be really dated by the way, the first lines we hear Peter asking are, "Who am I?" Peter doesn't know yet. He's a kid, he doesn't know who he wants to be yet. To make matters worse, Peter has it pretty rough. No one respects him, he gets bullied, and the girl he loves doesn't even know who he is. Young men and women, especially those in high school, have no clue who they are, so they define themselves by how others see them. Everyone sees Peter as a loser, so he sees himself as a loser. MJ makes him feel invisible, so he feels invisible. Not once does he stand up for himself before he gets his powers. He needs Harry to stand up for him. It even takes the entire scene for Peter to muster the courage to even talk to MJ. Eventually, Peter gets bit by the spider and wakes up the next day with his new powers. After gaining his powers, he loves the attention he gets from it. What nerdy boy wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to beat up the bully? Again, someone with no identity thrives off the opinion of others. By the way, I love how this movie balances showing off Peter's new powers, how he feels about them, and how it highlights his biggest flaws. The entire opening of the movie specifically, I found to be excellently written. Each scene where Peter discovers a new power says more about him than it does anything else, and that's good writing. Now, because Peter has all these new powers and he feels great about himself, he lets it get to his head. He's still young, he's cocky, arrogant, and impatient. This leads to his conversation with Ben, where he's disrespectful. He doesn't listen to Ben's words because all he cares about is impressing MJ in the most superficial natural way possible. I love how this movie treats Peter discovering his new powers as a metaphor for aging into adulthood. Peter needs to figure out what kind of man he's going to be with these new powers. When any young man or woman graduates high school, they need to figure out what kind of person they're going to be. And for a kids movie, which Spider-Man is, I think it's an excellent message. Now, at this point in the story, Peter doesn't know what kind of person he's going to be. That's why he's trying to get a new car, and that's why he lets the robber go, because he cares more about how these things make him feel rather than what they actually say about him. Of course, this leads to Uncle Ben's death, which is the turning point for the character. Peter suffered the consequences of his actions. He wasn't responsible with his new powers, and look what happened because of it. Yes, he gets his revenge, but that doesn't fulfill him. It's only a short-term fix for his long-term problem. He still has no identity. Who is Peter Parker? Everything up to this point in the movie is all character. Again, there is very little plot, but it works because it set Peter down this well thought out and well executed arc. People may complain that this version of Spider-Man isn't as quippy as other versions. I don't care as much because this trilogy, more so than the other movies, has so much heart, especially his scenes with MJ, so let's talk about that. MJ is clearly a dated character. She's a damsel in distress like 3 times in each movie, and all she does is scream. Now, while I don't think she's the most interesting love interest in a comic book movie, I gotta give the writers credit. I do think she's a well thought out and well layered character. MJ is a real person with passions, dreams, and characteristics. She's dated, but she's a real person. MJ struggles with her identity too. At first, she's just the popular girl who hangs out with the popular guys because that's what girls her age do. One of the more touching scenes of the movie is the first time Peter and MJ really talk to each other. Peter overhears MJ's abusive father and then tries to console her in the backyard. MJ feels lost. She has no identity. She doesn't even know what really makes her happy. What she eventually learns about herself in this movie is that she needs someone that sees her, the real her. Her family doesn't see her, Flash Thompson doesn't see her, Harry doesn't see her, but Peter does. MJ probably wants to be an actress because that's how she feels she can be seen. It's funny, at the end of the scene, Peter's takeaway is that he needs to get a nice car to impress MJ, but in reality, by listening to her and encouraging her dreams, that's how he's going to win her over. When she reveals to Peter that she has a job as a waitress, he doesn't shame her. He encourages her to have a job, to pursue her dreams. Peter helps MJ go on an arc where she figures out her identity, what she really wants. So despite her character being a little bit dated, I gotta applaud the writers for tying her story into the main theme of the movie. The same could be said for Harry. Harry's entire story revolves around daddy issues. Harry has been raised by his father to earn his love and affection, by doing well in school or by living up to his potential, quote unquote. In his first scene, Harry is shamed for not living up to his dad's expectations. When he graduates high school, he gets the bare minimum amount of approval. The only time Harry gets his father's approval in a meaningful way is when Harry admits he was wrong and that his father was right. You know how emotionally manipulative that is? Now, unlike MJ and Peter, Harry isn't really struggling with his identity because his entire identity revolves around his father's approval. Now, don't get me wrong, this is an incredibly unhealthy way to live, but that's the life he's living right now. When Norman dies in the end, Harry's daddy issues are so deep it leads into the next 2 movies. Harry's story ties into the themes of this movie in a different way. It shows how unhealthy centering your identity around another person's approval is, and we see where it leads Harry by the end of the story. Now, I would argue the second most important character of the movie is Norman, so let's talk about him. The Green Goblin is an over-the-top villain for sure. Let's be real, no military-grade suit of armor would ever look like this. But the reason Norman's story still works is because of how tragic he is deep down. External success and approval are the only things that matter to Norman right now. He wants to feel right and superior to everyone else. His identity is so dependent on how others view him. Norman shames his son because his son isn't living up to these superficial expectations. Why should he love Harry if Harry isn't good in school? As I just mentioned, he's emotionally manipulative towards his son, gives him approval after Harry agrees with him. The Green Goblin persona is built up anger at the world trying to tear him down as he sees it. He's lashing out because of that. He doesn't feel rewarded for his hard work and sacrifice. If people don't love and admire you, then what is the point? Everyone should lift up exceptional normal people like Norman. Once he loses his company and all its funding, that's when he comes to the conclusion that, as he says, people will always turn on you despite all you have done for them. The Goblin wants to destroy everything that is out of Norman's control. He wants to believe that acting out of self-interest is what's best for everyone. Like Harry, so much of Norman's identity is how others see him. It doesn't matter that he's rich. It doesn't matter that he has a successful company. Others need to see him as exceptional. When he meets Spider-Man, he can't wrap his head around the fact that Spider-Man wants to help people because it's the right thing to do. He thinks Spider-Man only does it for approval. This is why Norman wants to challenge Spider-Man. He goes out of his way to convince him of his ways. Why help the people if they're going to turn on you eventually? But Peter rejects Goblin, which causes Goblin to go after Peter in the end. I don't really love this bit of Norman challenging Peter's beliefs, because Peter doesn't really struggle with this throughout the second half of the movie. He looks at a newspaper one time, proving Norman's point. He questions it once, and that's it. The end of the movie is more so Peter affirming his new identity and belief. What he believes is right. So Norman gives Spider-Man an ultimatum: save MJ or save all these innocent people. Norman wants Spider-Man to save MJ and sacrifice all those kids so the public will turn on him. Peter is able to save both, which I really hate, by the way. I hate false stakes, but that's not too important to this movie. The New Yorkers stand up for Peter, proving Goblin wrong that you can be beloved if you do good things. Then everything climaxes in a truly beautiful ending. Peter gets beaten up, which I love, by the way. I love the physicality of these movies. Then Norman tries one last time to turn Peter to his side. Remember, Norman believes that everyone is motivated by external validation. So what does he do? He gives Peter his approval. "You are like a son to me. I'm so proud of you." He talks to Peter the same way he talks to Harry. In the beginning of the movie, this would have worked. This is the approval Peter would have wanted, but Peter has gone on an arc. He knows who he is now. He is Spider-Man. "I have a father, his name was Ben Parker," is so important to his arc about identity, because what his father told him is who he wants to be, a good man who treats his great power responsibly. Peter doesn't need external validation anymore. When you're comfortable with your identity, other people don't matter as much. So Norman's manipulation doesn't work, and it gets him killed. Perfect way to cap off Peter's arc. But the movie doesn't end there. MJ wants to be with Peter, but Peter says no. To him, the responsible thing to do would be to protect MJ. So despite his own feelings, he lets MJ go, and the movie ends with Peter saying, "Who am I? I'm Spider-Man." A great way to end the movie. Spider-Man scored a 90% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a suspiciously low 67% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 7.4 out of 10. Spider-Man would end up grossing $804 million at the box office, which not only made it a massive success for Sony, but that also made it the third highest grossing movie of the year, with Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter taking the top spots. Spider-Man also managed to outperform Star Wars pretty easily. The movie resonated with audiences so deeply all over the world, but most specifically New Yorkers. With the September 11th terrorist attack still fresh on New Yorkers' minds, the unity of the New Yorkers shown in that movie hit hard for a lot of people. Spider-Man also reinvigorated belief in the comic book genre, far more than Blade or X-Men ever did. It's fair to say that without this movie, the MCU and the entire comic book industry as we know it wouldn't exist. So it's not surprising that right after this movie came out, the sequel was greenlit. Sam Raimi instantly signed on to return, and production went underway. Now, to be honest, there's not much interesting that went on during the production of this movie. Right from the start, Raimi knew that Doc Ock would be the main villain of the movie. Early drafts of the sequel had Doc Ock being a much younger version of the character, one that would compete with Peter for MJ's love, but that idea was scrapped relatively quickly. Another interesting thing to note was that Tobey Maguire re-aggravated a pre-existing back condition filming Seabiscuit, and it was said that if he injured his back, he could be paralyzed. This led to Jake Gyllenhaal being cast to replace Tobey Maguire, but eventually Tobey recovered and reclaimed the role. This was actually the source of Tobey's "my back" joke featured in the movie. The rest of the production went pretty smoothly, with principal photography beginning in April of 2003 and reshoots concluding the following February. On June 30th, 2004, Spider-Man 2 would release in theaters. Now, Spider-Man 2, even more so than the previous movie, has the sauce. For one, this movie is shot in a more cinematic aspect ratio, switching from a 16:9 widescreen aspect ratio to a 21:9 ultra-wide aspect ratio. This just allows there to be more on the screen. And with a movie where someone swings through the streets of New York, that's typically a good thing. I'd also argue the visual effects are much better in this movie. 22 years later, and this movie still looks really good. It's a little bit dated, but you're only going to notice that if you're specifically looking for it. Another thing I'd argue is that the action is much better here. It seems like Sam Raimi had more freedom to do what he wanted with the action in this film, and I feel like for a Sam Raimi film, that's typically a good thing. Is there anything more iconic than the train sequence? That one transition into Doc Ock's glasses is one of the most iconic transition shots in a comic book movie. And then having that transition to the actual train fight where so much is done visually and technically was awesome. I love the detail at the end where Peter needs a second to figure out what to do. He doesn't just figure it out on the spot. I'll touch on it later when I dive deeper into the story, but this whole sequence is phenomenal. Now, an underrated part of this movie that I don't hear talked about enough is the humor. This movie is genuinely funny, and not in an MCU kind of way, which makes it feel a lot more fresh. Little things that stuck out to me were the 15 seconds that were spent showing Peter putting the brooms back in the closet. J. Jonah Jameson is also hilarious in this movie. At one point, Peter hands him a photo and he says, "It stinks, page 1, please." That was so funny to me. Also, I get that the point of this movie is to torture Peter around every turn, but some of the things that happen to him are straight comical. When he's at the banquet, he keeps getting robbed of the chance to have an hors d'oeuvre. I can't explain it, that was so funny to me. Or in the beginning of the movie when Peter drops his books and people keep walking into him. This movie is genuinely funny at times, but not in an overbearing way, which I really appreciate. Lastly, like the previous movie, New York continues to be such an important character. Raimi continues to make an effort to not only show the people of New York, but street level scenes where people are actually walking through the streets of New York. I love it, it adds so much to the movie. But what truly makes this movie great is this story. So let's talk about that. The first movie to me was all about identity and responsibility. The second movie feels like it is about choice, what it means to do the right thing, and how that isn't always so easy. Now, just like the first movie, what makes this movie so great to me is just how Peter focused it is. I don't need to repeat myself too much. The most important part of any Spider-Man movie to me is the characterization of Peter Parker. This movie nails that more than any other Spider-Man movie. This movie also follows a pretty similar formula to the previous movie. The first half of the movie is a balance between Peter's struggles and the villain becoming more villainous. Then towards the halfway point of the movie, they clash for the first or second time, and then they're at war with each other until the end of the movie. Let's begin by talking about Peter in the first half of this movie. This first hour feels solely devoted to beating Peter up emotionally as much as possible. This poor guy cannot catch a break. The movie begins with him getting fired from his pizza job because he was late saving a kid as Spider-Man. Then the movie transitions right away to him getting fired from the Daily Bugle. Now, he doesn't actually get fired from the Daily Bugle, but it shows how unkind that job is to him. Eventually, we find out that it is his birthday. So a pretty shitty birthday. And then we get a pretty sad scene where we learn Aunt May is losing the house because she doesn't have Ben there to help her pay the bills. This movie makes it clear that being Spider-Man is hurting every other aspect of Peter's life. Everything in his life right now is a contradiction. Now, one thing that's repeatedly thrown in Peter's face in this movie is MJ. MJ is now a somewhat successful actress, and her face is on posters and billboards all over the city. I love that this movie explores a superhero dealing with the consequences of their sacrifice. Peter, at the end of the first movie, decided not to be with MJ because it was the right thing to do. Just because he made that choice doesn't mean he's always content with it. It's going to be hard for him to deal with actually saying no. And we see that. Peter sees posters of MJ constantly, and it makes him feel terrible. Sacrifice is not supposed to be easy, and this movie shows that. I really hope Brand New Day does something similar with how it shows how hard Peter's sacrifice was at the end of No Way Home. The movie moves on and continues to show him struggling to balance his life. He misses MJ's play, which really upsets her, and he can't even make it to class. Peter can't even form meaningful relationships because as Spider-Man, he must keep that a secret. No superhero movie has ever done a better job at showing how being a superhero would impact someone, how hard it would be to find that balance. This movie makes it feel like being Spider-Man would suck. And that's a really hard thing to do. This internal conflict Peter faces, as we come to see, is the foundation of this movie. While he's struggling with this, Peter meets Doc Ock and he appears to be everything Peter wants to be. Successful, making a difference, having love. How can Peter have this? Why can't Peter have this? Well, not everyone is perfect. In the blink of an eye, Otto's experiment goes awry, and he loses everything. As this happens, Peter starts to lose his powers because of his internal turmoil. He decided to be Spider-Man at the end of the first movie, but now he's questioning it, and he's certainly not at peace. Roughly around the halfway point of the movie is when we get the banquet scene, and this is Peter's worst nightmare. Everything goes wrong for him. He can't get an hors d'oeuvre or drink, he can't get good pictures, he gets yelled at by his boss, Harry lashes out at him because he resents Peter, MJ rejects him again, and to cap it all off, she's revealed to be getting married, to his boss's son no less. This movie does a really good job at creating realistic problems for Peter. Now the way these problems play out is a bit comical, but each individual problem is very real. Even problems that other people are having feel very real, like May losing her house and not being able to afford it. This isn't resolved by the end of the movie, by the way. It's not like Bruce Wayne shows up to buy the house from the bank. And you know what? That's okay. That's real life. So Peter is tired of the weight of being Spider-Man. He just wants to be Peter Parker again. Now, what makes this really hard for Peter is that Peter rejecting Spider-Man is also rejecting Ben. Peter convinces himself that this was Ben's wish for him, not his own. So he comes to the conclusion that his sacrifice in the first movie wasn't worth it, so he gives up Spider-Man. He initially feels pretty great. Everything is going right. His classes are better, his work is better, and he's just significantly less stressed. But then he gets a reality check that his problems aren't all fixed. MJ is still mad at him, his aunt got mad at him, Harry is still mad at him. He eventually realizes the consequences of not being Spider-Man. Crime is up, he doesn't stop someone from being mugged, he can't save everyone from a burning building. It all makes him feel terrible. It turns out giving up Spider-Man doesn't make him feel better. So what's the point? What's the point of Peter struggling so much balancing his life as Spider-Man only for him to continue struggling with it after he gives up Spider-Man? Well, this leads us into Peter telling Aunt May the truth about the night Ben died. Because this scene thematically is emblematic of the entire movie. Peter did the right thing by telling Aunt May the truth about what really happened that night. Initially, May rejects him and makes him feel really bad about it, but eventually when he goes back to May, May is apologetic and is really happy Peter told her the truth. She reinforces that what he did was right despite her initial reaction. She and Peter are closer because of it. May then gives her speech about being a hero and how it isn't easy, how sometimes doing the right thing or doing what's truly fulfilling is going to suck, but eventually it will make you better and all the people around you better. It keeps us honest, gives us strength, makes us noble. There is a hero in all of us. Yeah, being Spider-Man sucked for a bit, but you know, you just have to hold on a little bit longer. Because Spider-Man wasn't just Ben's wish, it's who Peter really is. It makes him feel good, and he loves doing the right thing. So after Otto attacks Peter and captures MJ, Peter is ready again to be Spider-Man, because that is who he is, regardless of the consequences or the struggles. We then get the train fight, and it ends with Peter nearly dying to save these people. Fighting on the train and saving those people reminds Peter of why he is Spider-Man. Seeing those people on the train thank him and feeling inspired is why he does this. He just needed to hold on a little bit longer, like May said. There will be hard times, doing the right thing isn't always sexy, but at the end of the day, it will be worth it. When he sees the kid give him his mask back, that's the moment where he remembers all the pain is worth it, for them. It's not just the action that makes this whole train scene great. It ends in such a beautiful way. Any superhero fan watching this scene feels so inspired, and that's what Spider-Man is supposed to represent. The movie proceeds with Otto capturing Peter and delivering him to Harry. Harry finds out the truth and he is stunned. Now, I want to talk about Harry because it's not just Peter who's struggling with balance in this movie. Harry is as well. Harry begins the movie being more productive with his life, leading his father's business and making a difference. Now, how Oscorp is still in business after the events of the first movie is a mystery to me, but still Harry is working towards a positive goal. Then Otto's experiment goes wrong, and Oscorp allegedly goes out of business. Harry has this awful line of dialogue where he says, "I'm ruined, I have nothing left besides Spider-Man," but narratively it's important. He is at his lowest, and instead of being steady, he gives in to his worst impulses. In a way, Oscorp was Harry's Spider-Man. It made him fulfilled, and it made him feel like he was doing the right thing. When that goes away, he focuses entirely on his destructive dream of killing Spider-Man. Chasing dreams feels good, but it's not always the right thing, and it's not always going to make you fulfilled. We'll see where this leads Harry in the future. Now, of course, the other main character who is also struggling with balance is Otto. Doc Ock is such a layered villain that mirrors Peter perfectly. As I said way before, Otto appears to have everything. Working on this energy source to make a difference is Otto's quote-unquote Spider-Man. It's the right thing and it leaves him fulfilled. But of course, not everyone is perfect. Bad things will happen even when what you're doing is right. His experiment fails and he loses everything. Otto is a little bit arrogant. He has an ego. So the arms get to him and convince him to follow his dream at any cost. He loses track of why this was his dream in the first place, to make a difference. Instead, the end goal is all that matters. Otto doesn't give himself a chance to be steady, to get back on his feet. He is feeding that side of him that does please his ego. In a way, Otto gave up his Spider-Man to chase his dreams. So in the end, Peter, Harry, and Otto are all struggling to find that balance. Peter goes on that arc, Harry doesn't, and Otto is reminded by the help of Peter, which is what makes the ending so powerful and personal. Peter goes to Otto and tells him what he has learned. He reminds Otto of why he is doing all of this, the responsibility of it, and Otto changes. He gives his life to stop the machine. In the end, gave up his dream to do the right thing, and as a result, Otto didn't die a monster. The whole theme of the movie and the arc that Peter goes on is unlike anything I've seen in a superhero movie. It's not a sexy message, but it's one that's so important. It's not surprising to me how well this movie has aged. It's so deep to so many people and it resonates so personally. The movie ends with Peter finally getting MJ, which is another great payoff of two movies. I love this movie, and by the time I am done reviewing all 8 of these live-action Spider-Man movies, I would be shocked if this movie wasn't my favorite. Spider-Man 2 scored a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with an 82% audience score. The movie would also score a 7.5 out of 10 on IMDb. Spider-Man 2 would end up grossing $786 million at the box office, making it the 3rd highest grossing movie of the year. Spider-Man 2 was a success by basically every metric, so the 3rd movie was instantly put into development. Spider-Man 2 writer Alvin Sargent was brought on to write Spider-Man 3 and even signed an option to write a Spider-Man 4. Now, the earliest stages of the production for Spider-Man 3 are pretty well known to most people in the community. Sam Raimi and his brother spent 2 months writing a treatment for this movie. The main villain of the movie would be Sandman, and it would mostly explore Peter discovering that there's humanity in the villains that he fights. However, Sony producer Avi Arad thought that the villains in the previous 2 movies were too niche, and he wanted a more well-known and popular villain for this 3rd movie. That is why he wanted Venom to be in this movie, who is arguably Spider-Man's most popular villain. Raimi hated Venom. He felt like Venom had no humanity to him, and it also went completely against the themes of his treatment he just wrote. However, Raimi lost the fight, and he was forced to include Venom in his movie. Allegedly, the Vulture was also considered to be in this movie, but thankfully that idea was scrapped. Principal photography began in November of 2005 and concluded in July of 2006. There were no major problems during the production of this movie, but it was an extensive and demanding shoot. It was said Raimi would need to shuttle between up to 7 working sets at one time. However, Spider-Man 3 was completed on time and released on May 4th, 2007. So, Spider-Man 3 is not a very good movie. Now, with that being said, I'm quite surprised that this movie was once considered to be genuinely awful, because it's not even close. Many people have pointed out that the multitude of villains is the biggest reason why this movie isn't very strong. because Raimi wanted to focus on Sandman, but Avi Arad wanted to focus on Venom, and since they're both in the movie, there's not really enough time to develop either one. This is definitely a factor, and I'll dive deeper into this in a bit. Another factor I haven't heard discussed enough is how convenient a lot of the events in the movie are. Instead of there being a natural flow of events happening, it feels like certain things happen simply because they need to happen. The first two movies were somewhat like this, but the third movie is on another level. These factors that I just mentioned are important, but to be honest, the biggest reason why I don't find this movie to be very good is because of Peter and his character arc. I don't think his story flows in a way that's nearly as powerful as it did in the previous two movies. So while I wouldn't say this movie stinks and while I wouldn't say it's awful, I feel like Peter's arc leads to an ending that's a bit anticlimactic and a bit unearned. So Peter's story begins with everything going well. Life couldn't be better for him. People love Spider-Man. He's actually balancing his personal life like school. Him and MJ are doing great. Peter is happy. Things are going so well for Peter that he wants to dismiss any problem in his life. He doesn't want anything to risk interrupting his new perfect life. This is most notable with MJ. MJ's having trouble at work. Reviews of her most recent performance weren't great. Now, Peter isn't straight up neglectful of MJ when she expresses her frustrations, but he kind of diminishes her problems. He doesn't treat them seriously. He is taking the easiest route in his life to fix his problems. Instead of listening to her, he tells her to just brush her problems aside. If he can do it as Spider-Man, then she can do it as an actress. He's telling her how to fix her problems instead of just listening to her talk about them. This, of course, doesn't go well, especially because she is going to bury her problems, which only makes things worse. The same thing kind of happens with Harry. So Harry and Peter are beefing because Harry learned the truth about Peter at the end of the previous movie. Early on in the movie, Peter and Harry fight, which leads to Harry injuring himself and getting amnesia. By the way, this is one of the many conveniences that I spoke about. The writers clearly needed time to develop the other villains in the movie, so might as well have Harry forget his main motivation for a significant part of the story. After Harry wakes up, Peter doesn't tell Harry the truth because it would create another problem in his life. Why would Peter create a problem when one was just resolved? I don't entirely love this because telling a hard truth is something that Peter did in the previous movie with Aunt May, so him not doing it here is a bit of a regression. But Peter is a human being, so I'm not going to flame the movie for this. Going back to MJ, because of Peter's lackluster emotional support, she doesn't tell him that she was fired. This causes a rift between the two that Peter doesn't even know about. At this point in the movie, Peter met with May because he wanted to tell her he plans on proposing to MJ. May is so happy, so she tells him a man must be understanding to put his wife first. When Peter and May have a one-on-one conversation, that usually means they're going to talk about the theme of the movie. So after this conversation, I thought this would be a key part of his character arc, but it kind of isn't, as we'll touch on later. At the dinner where Peter plans on proposing, MJ berates him and storms away, leaving Peter confused. Now, this leads me into one big criticism I have. Peter does things in this movie that I just don't buy Peter Parker doing. Sure, I can buy his ego being inflated because of the praise Spider-Man is getting, but him kissing another girl seems so unlike him. I didn't like that. It seemed unnecessary, especially since Peter knew MJ was watching him. It's really strange. Peter and May learn the truth that Flint Marko was really the man that killed Uncle Ben, and that he escaped prison. I really don't like them changing who killed Ben. It's too cheap. It's too easy of a way to develop a personal relationship between Peter and this new villain, and it's at the expense of a plot point from a previous movie. Anyway, MJ stops by to console Peter, but since he's so angry, he shuts himself off emotionally completely from her. He just tells her he is fine, and MJ gets the message and leaves. This only distances them further. Shortly afterwards, the symbiote attaches itself to Peter. Again, talk about convenience. This alien symbiote crashes from space right next to Spider-Man in the middle of the night. There's nothing organic here. A plot point literally just falls from the sky. The beginning of the villain's stories in the previous two movies felt organic in terms of how it entered Peter's life. There is nothing less organic than something just falling out of the sky. This being how Venom enters the story is clearly a result of Raimi not wanting Venom to be in the movie, because he clearly didn't know how to include Venom organically, so it feels inorganic. And also in a way, it takes away agency from Peter. Peter being a bit of an asshole should not be because of some symbiote. It should be because Peter is going on a character arc. Just tone down the rudeness and edginess a bit, and it's a lot more realistic. And as we'll touch on later, Eddie Brock is borderline useless in this story. So after hearing the news, Peter hunts down Flint Marko and pretty much kills him. This is what his intention was, so that's all that matters. At this point in the movie, things just don't go right for Peter. MJ breaks up with Peter. Peter goes out of his way to ruin Eddie's life, which he kind of deserved because as a photographer, he submitted a fake photo. But regardless, Eddie's life is ruined. May is disappointed that Spider-Man would kill someone. Peter then attacks Harry, and then Peter has his super edgy phase and hurts MJ. Peter is kind of spiraling here. By the way, I get all the criticisms of Bully Maguire. It's cringe and it's funny, but I think that's the point of the movie. The movie wants you to cringe at Peter. So even though I chuckled because I'm familiar with all the memes, I don't hate it. I think it's the point. Going back to what actually matters, after hurting MJ, this is when Peter realizes he must change. Peter ignored all his problems, tried to take the easy path, and look where it led him. Peter gets rid of the symbiote and then talks to May, which is when the theme of the movie is established. Peter really screwed up, but in order to move on, he must forgive himself. The central theme of this movie seems to be about forgiveness, which also applies to the three main villains of the movie. All these movies are about Peter struggling with something internally. He needs to acknowledge what he's struggling with and then grow because of it. In this movie, Peter was struggling with something internally, and the end result is just to have him forgive himself. I feel like they're not directly addressing the problems that Peter had in the first half of the movie. Peter's persistence in maintaining the status quo at any cost is never addressed again. He just needs to forgive himself and the villains. This is not a fair arc for Peter. It's not like this whole movie began because of Peter's unwillingness to forgive himself or someone else. This movie needed to actually address the issue in the beginning of the movie, and it doesn't. Peter low-key doesn't face the consequences of his actions. He just needs to forgive himself, and it leads to a pretty anticlimactic final fight. Sure, I'll give the sequence here some props that the action is pretty damn good, but what's at stake emotionally here? Nothing. Peter isn't going into this fight with the mindset he needs to forgive Harry, Flint, or Eddie. Yeah, Harry forgives Peter, but that wasn't a result of anything Peter did. Peter should be blessed that Harry's butler finally talked to Harry, but more on that later. With Eddie isn't able to forgive Peter, so he ends up dying. And then with Flint just shows up and tells the truth, and Peter decides to forgive him. This doesn't feel as well thought out as the other two movies, and that's a shame. So I don't love Peter's arc in this story. It never actually addressed the problems he was going through, and it led to an unsatisfying end. Let's talk about the villains, and how each one I found to be pretty weak to varying degrees. Let's begin with Harry. Harry attacks Peter relatively early on in the movie, but since the script needs time to develop Flint and the symbiote, Harry gets amnesia, which, as I said before, is a pretty big convenience for the story. Harry is then chilling for most of the movie. After a hangout session with MJ where he kisses her, he then gets visions of his father and remembers everything. Convenient. He gets his revenge on Peter, which then leads to Peter getting his revenge back and literally scarring Harry. At this point, I guess the movie is arguing that Harry needs to forgive Peter, but the thing is, Harry doesn't really forgive Peter. He just learns the truth about what happened that night his father died. There was nothing to forgive Peter for. Peter didn't kill Norman. Also, it's pretty convenient that Harry's butler waited all this time and all these years to tell Harry the truth. That would have been convenient a long time ago. So after one conversation, Harry quote-unquote forgives Peter and teams up with him. Harry helps Peter fight and gives his life to protect Peter. This is something that his father would have never done. In a way, it's a completion of a trilogy-long arc for Harry. He had spent so much time being consumed by his father's approval all throughout the trilogy. But in the end, he finally removed himself from his father's shadow and he did what was right. On paper, I don't hate this, but I don't think it was entirely earned. All Harry did was listen to his butler and then he turned good. He never actually dealt with his daddy issues and why he was so desperate for his dad's approval. Both Harry and Peter don't go on arcs that are earned. They each have one conversation and then change. The actual work that goes into a person changing doesn't happen here. So Harry's story ends in a way that isn't climactic at all. Let's talk about Flint Marko, aka Sandman. Because, to be honest, I'm quite surprised many people say he is the one bright spot of this movie, because I think he's just as shallow as the rest of the villains. So Flint's entire motivation in this movie is that his daughter is sick and he wants to help her. So he goes around town stealing money to presumably help his daughter. Sure, this is a decent way to build a foundation for a villain, but that's just his entire character. It's not like Flint is all that clever or menacing. Pretty much every sequence that he's in after he becomes the Sandman begins with him just casually walking around and then someone confronts him. This happens 3 times. Also, correct me if I'm wrong because I might be missing something. What is he stealing the money for? Is he stealing the money for research? Is he stealing the money to pay bills? Because that's all he's doing in the movie, is stealing money, and they don't ever explain what he's doing with it. In the end, his role in the final fight is Eddie going up to him and saying, "Hey, you find Spider-Man annoying, right? Wanna fight him?" And Flint is like, "Sure." It's not like there's a promise of money or help for his daughter. There's no organic flow here. In the previous 2 movies, there was a reason for the final fight other than, "I want to attack Spider-Man," while here it is literally just, again, "I want to attack Spider-Man." Is there something that happens during the final fight that leads to Flint wanting to confess the truth to Peter? No. He was just hammering at him 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later, he's just standing at the top telling the truth. Also, there's no resolution for his character. He just tells the truth and flies away. Did he help his daughter? I couldn't tell you. Flint is a fine villain, but he's far from a good one. A truly bad villain would be Venom. Venom and Eddie Brock are just not necessary to this movie. In fact, he doesn't really cross over with any other storyline until the end when he casually walks up to Flint Marko. Eddie is a really hollow character. He just wants to be loved and has no identity because of it. So things go wrong for Eddie. Again, talk about the perfect convenience for the plot. Peter happens to go to the church that Eddie is at to get rid of the symbiote. It's just convenience. It's not meaningful narrative progression. What is his motivation in the end? I'm mad at Spider-Man, I want to kill him. I think in the end, they killed Eddie as a way of saying Eddie couldn't forgive Peter and that was his demise. It's just so shallow, and it's also comical in the way that he dies. Spider-Man 3 is not a good movie, and that's unfortunate because it led to a pretty big change with the franchise. Spider-Man 3 scored a 62% on Rotten Tomatoes, along with a 51% audience score. On IMDb, the movie scored a 6.3 out of 10. Spider-Man 3 grossed $885 million at the box office, making it not only the 3rd highest grossing movie of 2007, but also the highest grossing movie of the trilogy. However, the fallout of Spider-Man 3 led to some tension between Sam Raimi and Sony. A Spider-Man 4 was put into production, and it was given a release date of May 6th, 2011. Raimi wasn't happy with how Spider-Man 3 went, so with Spider-Man 4, he wanted a lot more creative control to give his story a satisfying and emotional ending. However, the script kept going through extensive rewrites, and it left Raimi unhappy with the direction of the project. In January of 2010, it was announced that Sam Raimi would be leaving the project, and as a result, Spider-Man 4 was cancelled. This led to the reboot of the entire Spider-Man franchise, and The Amazing Spider-Man was put into production. My next video is going to be a retrospective on the 2 Amazing Spider-Man films, so if you want to watch that, then click on the video right here, and if there's no video right here, then the video hasn't come out yet. Thank you everyone so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.